So we had a question on the channel recently about coloring more complex pages or pages and covers that have a lot of different elements and how they can be sort of intimidating, which I agree, they can be. In this video I want to show you guys how to sort of break them down and make it easier for you, so check it out. Hey there, my name is K. Michael Russell. I am a comic book colorist and the founder of o1artschool.com, and in the video today I'm going to be showing you guys how to break down some complicated pages or complex panels here. And I have some examples from some of my favorite colorists to kind of show you guys how they handled it, and hopefully we'll learn something. So the first one we're going to look at here is a cover from Greg Ticini and Dave McCaig. Dave is one of my favorites. You guys have heard me quote him all the time on this channel. And this is what I would consider to be a pretty complex piece that reads very clearly, and so I thought it'd be a good example for this video. So to start off with, I want to talk a little bit about how you should actually look at this at the beginning. And let me get my trusty marker here. So there we go. Do something other than red. So first off, you got to figure out what you want the reader to focus on. And most of the time that's pretty easy. In this case, of course, it's our characters kind of right here in the center. But there's a lot of other stuff going on here. You've got a big shark up here, you got a bunch of fish over here, you got all this stuff down here. But the focal point is really, these characters here, and that's really what you want to really draw the most attention on the page. And Dave has done a couple of things here to make that make sense a little bit better. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the color information. We're going to look at this in just black and white. And if you watch this channel for very long, you've heard me quote Dave before on this, but the color doesn't matter a lot of times. It's really just value and contrast. This cover is sort of a perfect example of that. So even in black and white, before we've started doing anything with color at all, this cover reads pretty well. Now some of these washes, I don't know if he put these washes in or if the artist put these washes in, honestly, but all the contrast is here, right? Or most of the contrast is right here, the most contrast. You've got really dark shapes on the figures. You've got some dark values right next to some very, very light values, okay? So when you have that right next to each other, your eye is immediately drawn to, that part. Even the shark, it's got some bright spots on him, and he's to command some attention here. But even that is not quite as white. It's got a little bit of gray in it, or lower values that are not quite as bright. And in all the areas that he wants this, wants the elements to recede, there's less contrast. If you look at the contrast between the fish here and the background, there is some contrast. The fish are darker, but as they go back, they're getting less and less contrast, and there's definitely less contrast here than there is over here. There's less contrast at the bottom. You got to fit the logo in there somewhere. You got to give that something. He couldn't go in here with, a really bright color and start throwing bright lights all over the place. The image is going to kind of become a mess, And if the values were higher on the fish, if he said, hey, yeah, let's do some really bright colored fish over here, like, it's going to distract from the point of this cover. So even on a single image like this, there's a lot of things you can do before you ever think about color to, make your page work. And most of us don't work black to white, or black and white to color, but you should at least be aware of what your values are, for the colors that you're choosing. So now, looking at it in color, he's got more weapons at his disposal here, so the red on these characters, of course, really pops off against all the cool colors. If he had done what I see a lot of beginner colorists do, they're like, hey, cool fish, I like colorful fish, let's make some fish colors. And they start throwing around, oh, there's purple fish and there's yellow fish and all these things, and this doesn't work anymore, right? Because it's distracting. It's pulling us away from our focus, which in this case is the people. So your color choices, even for background elements like this, are always very important, that you're not just randomly throwing colors around. Every color you choose should serve the story, or in this case, serve just the story of this panel here, the storytelling that's going on. So I just love this cover. It's great for a million reasons, but So let's look at one more cover before we jump into that one. So this is another cover from, this is from Black Science. It's drawn by Matteo Scalera, I hope I'm saying that right, and Moreno Denizio, which I hope I'm saying that right too. He signs his name Reno, so I'm just going to call him Reno. He's one of my favorite colorists. I love his work on Black Science, and I felt like it's an art school in and of itself. You should definitely check this book out if you haven't. But this is an example of, it's not always the characters that are the most important feature, and so you've got to be able to deal with that. And now obviously Matteo does a lot of work, just like Rick on the previous page, with composition, and I think some of these washes are his here too. So they're doing some of the groundwork. I definitely don't want to put all of this on the colorist here, you know. So keep that in mind. But here, you know, you've got the characters. They're small in the panel, and there's not a lot of contrast. There's a little bit of contrast against the dark thing that they're standing on, and of course you've got the contrast of the silhouette basically that reads very clearly. But you know, this is really the, you know, kind of the star of this cover is the background, and so in this case there's more color there. The colors are more vibrant, and there's less vibrant colors down on the characters in the front. So this is just another way to handle it. It's not always going to be the characters in the panel that is your focus, you know. But let's say that it was, just for whatever reason, you know, think about what we could do. You know, what could you do? And you guys can comment below if you have some ideas that are different from mine. But I'm going to show you, I did this real quick in like 5 minutes. Not even 5 minutes, like a minute. So by washing the background out some more, kind of muting those colors a little bit, and I just threw around some color splotches. I don't really know what color the costumes are on that they're wearing here, but I know it has some red and I think some yellow in it. So, but you see just how quickly a little bit of color stands out against all of the muted colors around it. So I'm using, in this case, saturation, contrast and saturation in order to do that, because you can have contrast between values, light and dark. You can also have contrast between saturation, you know, in the values of that, or not the values of saturation, but the amount of saturation. So that's just another way that if they were going for a completely different look, and if I wanted to pull focus to these little people here in the corner, that would be one way to do it. Now, obviously, I didn't do as good of a job as Reno did, but all right. So this is a page from, I think it's from the same issue, possibly. Maybe not the same issue, but it's still Black Science, same book. And I wanted to show you guys some examples of, let's turn that off, of something in an actual book here. And this particular panel here is the one I want you guys to kind of focus on. Okay, so we're not really looking at these right now. But in this panel, this is another panel where it's very busy, it's very complex, there's a lot of stuff going on, there's a huge crowd, but your eye is immediately pulled to the characters up here, for most people, because of, guess what? Contrast again. So if we look at this in black and white, you can really see this effect. Obviously, there's a lot of different colors going on down here. If I turn this back on, if you look at all the colors of all these people, they're all wearing different colors. There's greens and purples and pretty much every color in the rainbow. But those colors against that particular background, in this case just the ground, the values really aren't that different. All of these values sort of fall into the same range, and you know, there's a blonde lady there that sticks out a little bit, but for the most part, the values are all very, very close together. But here, the values are very, very far apart. You've got a very bright light in front of some dark characters, and so again, before you even think about color, he's thinking about value. And you can see this in every single, you know, panel here. We've got a busy panel here with a lot of people in it, but the brightest values right there in the center. It's just a lot of the same tricks being used. It's not really tricks, the same techniques being used in all of these covers in different ways and different styles, but you're never going to get away from value and contrast being important, and that's really what I wanted to point out here today. And now I want to show you guys a different example of a completely different take for a different scenario here. And if you're afraid of a little alien skin, sorry, not safe for work, hide the kids. All right, so this very complex panel has a lot of stuff going on. This is really a completely different scenario. In this case, now we do have our lead characters up here, okay? But they're not really the focus of this particular panel. You know, the focus of this is to get you to sort of absorb the entire environment. Like, look at all these things going on. Look at all the people. Look at all the, you know, access and everything that's going on here. And the background is the character here, basically. You know, if this was a movie, and I tend to think in terms of, you know, film terms a lot of times when I'm thinking about how I think a scene is going to work. You know, a lot of times I'll actually think is, you know, what would I do if this was a movie? Like, how would they shoot this if this was on television? You know, that sort of thing. And this to me would be a good example of one of those, like, kind of slow pan, soak it all in. You know, there's all these things to sort of absorb before you notice that, you know, now obviously there's a letter box up here that makes it easy. The letterer is helping to tell a story here too. But this is the opposite scenario, what we were talking about earlier, where, you know, we're not trying to get this guy to jump out at you, really. You know, we're really wanting you to look at this entire scene and take it in and see, you know, what all is contributing to the story here. So that's at least, you know, my take on how these colorists are handling these things. And when you're doing this in your own work, let me jump back to this one more time. So in all of these things, step one is always going to be, what is the important shapes? You know, what am I trying to get to read here? You know, what are my planes of foreground, background? You know, think in those terms first before we start diving into all the details. And as you go forward and you're looking at your work at all times before you choose a color, you should always think, you know, how does this serve the story? How does this serve the page or this panel that I'm doing here? So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. It was more of kind of a theory discussion than anything else, but if you want some fundamentals, you want to learn sort of the basics from scratch, be sure to check the links in the description. I've got coloring courses and art courses there at those links, and I will also include links to some of these projects as well, so you guys can check them out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.